Hey guys, earlier this year I found out about the FIRE movement right here on YouTube. I discovered that I could plan for my retirement and with a specific goal in mind and retire before the age of 65 even though I'm in my 40s. In this video, I am going to discuss the financial movement and the steps that I took in 2020 to ensure that I could retire by age 50.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.
Before I get into this video, I want to put a disclaimer out there. I am not a financial advisor. I am not your financial advisor. Anything that you hear in this video is for entertainment purposes only. Please do your own research. Now, let's get into it. FIRE. What is it? FIRE is an acronym that means Financial Independence, Retire Early. People who join the FIRE movement often live frugally by cutting back on expenses so that they can retire before the age of 65. If they start early enough, many of them are able to retire as early as their 40s or even their 30s. So for people in the FIRE movement, retiring at an early age gives them the freedom to do whatever they want and not be bound by a 9-to-5 to survive. So before being introduced to the FIRE movement in March, I really thought that I was doing all that I could in order to secure my retirement. I finally had a well-paying job and thought that I was contributing enough in my retirement and savings account and that the amount that I would get from Social Security payments in retirement would be sufficient. In fact, I was just relying on hopes and dreams, and this plan even included me retiring at age 65. After crunching some numbers, I realized that if I remain ambitious, I could actually retire or achieve this financial freedom in 8 years if I wanted to. That means in 8 years, I could decide whether or not I want to stay at my job, if I want to retire, or if I just want to sit pina coladas on a beach all day, every day for the rest of my life. Here are some of the steps that I took in order to set myself up financially. The first thing I did, I analyzed my expenses. Once I figured out what I wasn't willing to negotiate as well as my expenses, I then calculated my FIRE number. I calculated my FIRE number using the 4% rule. This number is the number that you must have invested in stocks so that you can safely retire for the rest of your life by just withdrawing 4% annually. To get started with this calculation, you need to figure out what expenses you need to retire. What you're doing here, you are projecting the expenses that you'll be having annually when you retire. Let's say you decide that you can survive on $50,000 a year. You'll be using $50,000 for this calculation. Next, you take that number and divide it by 4% or 0.04. So for a person who decides that $50,000 is enough for them to retire on, dividing 50,000 by 0.04 or multiplying 50,000 by 25 would both give you 1.25 million. So your FIRE number would be 1.25 million, meaning that you will have to have 1.25 million invested in stocks in order to retire. By having $1.25 million upon retirement, in the first year, you can take out 4%, which equates to that $50,000 that you calculated. So once I discovered my FIRE number, or I figured out my FIRE number, the next thing I did, I stopped contributing to my student loan. Before April, I used to contribute at least $1,500 a month just to get my student loans paid at a faster time. But since the student loan interest rates were reduced to 0%, I found that it would have been a win-win situation for me to contribute that money that I was making in student loan payments monthly into the stock market instead so that I could have a higher return. I try to reduce non-essential spending when necessary. For me, I spent a lot of money on clothes and a lot of money on clothes that I didn't really use. I have tons of clothes in my closet with tags still on them. So I decided then and there that, you know what, I am not spending a dime again in 2020 on non-essential clothes. And in fact, I hope that I won't be spending any money on clothes for the next 3 years. And for me, folks, that's as frugal as it gets. I hardly spend money in partying or drinking and so forth. So there's not much wiggle room for me to be very frugal. Okay, so now I figured out my FIRE number, I freed up more money to invest, and I came to a plan as to what expenses that I will reduce immediately. So now these next steps are the steps that I made with respect to investing. I used to contribute about 13 to 15% in my retirement accounts bi-weekly. And I actually reduced the amount of money that I contributed to these accounts to 7%, which was the amount that my employer matched. I did this so that I could free up some after-tax money so that I could invest in non-retirement accounts in the stock market. For me, this step was really crucial because my plan is to retire at age 55, so I do need some sort of income between those ages of 50 and 59. 59 and a half is the age that I can withdraw from my retirement accounts without any tax penalty. So withdrawing from those investments would be important. Once I freed up more money to invest, I started purchasing stock through a brokerage account with Fidelity. While the recommendation is to invest in index funds or ETFs as a beginner, what I did, I looked at those index funds and I put together a list of the top 5 companies or the top 5 stocks within those portfolios. So the first shares of stock that I invested in were Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Tesla. And believe it or not, I do not regret doing it that way. I felt like since those 5 companies were actually driving the prices of those stocks, that I would be at more of an advantage if I purchased whole shares of those companies to get better returns. Once I purchased whole shares of those companies, then I invested in the ETFs. Then over the course of about 2 weeks, I tracked the market daily just so that I can see how the stock market fluctuates. And once I became more comfortable, I started investing more money and buying more companies that I was familiar with. Since then, I have taken a pay yourself first approach where I schedule payments to or deductions from my paychecks to all my investments. One other thing that I did was invested in my Roth IRA account for 2019. So since the tax deadline for 2020 was pushed back to July 15th, 2020, this just meant that the deadline for you to contribute to your Roth IRA was July 15th. So now I had like an additional 3 months to get together $6,000 to contribute to that Roth IRA. And I did it. Guys, if you haven't taken advantage of a Roth IRA, please do so today. The annual contribution limit for this type of account is $6,000. And any investment that you make into this account can grow tax-free for the life of the account as long as you withdraw after 59 and a half. There is an income limit to be eligible to contribute to this account, so please do your research before you start putting money into this type of account. I withdrew money from my emergency fund account in order to purchase my initial shares of stock. So this means I have to replenish my emergency account. One other thing that I did was set up recurring deposits from my paycheck to that emergency account. After investing in the stock market for a few months, once my non-retirement brokerage account was at an amount that I was satisfied with, I started to take advantage of my employer after-tax 401k account. And basically what this account allows me to do, it allows me to contribute after-tax money that could be converted into my Roth IRA through what is called a mega backdoor Roth IRA. If you're interested in a mega backdoor Roth IRA, please note that your employer has to offer this kind of benefit. So I've invested in the stock market. I set up my retirement accounts through my employer. I started replenishing my emergency fund. The next thing I wanted to do was diversify my portfolio. And one thing that I did was invest about $2,000 in art. No, I did not go and buy any $1 million paintings, but I did invest through this platform called Masterworks. And what they do, they purchase those $1 million art and they buy and sell for a profit. It is a financial investment, it's not a physical investment, and what they do is offer pieces of this art, of these $1 million art, that they will be selling to investors at $20 per share. The minimum amount of money that you can invest in an art piece is $1,000. It is not a cheap form of investment, but it's just something that I wanted to do to diversify my portfolio. And of course, you guys know that I started this YouTube channel. I acknowledge that I do have to be aggressive if I want to retire in 8 years, and setting up an additional income stream would be important for me to achieve this. I am sure that in 2020, I would have to return to paying all the additional bills like student loans and so forth. So I do need that extra income to push me over to the edge. I encourage you to calculate your FIRE number so that you could start making steps to achieving financial freedom. If you feel like you're not making enough money to invest into stocks, just know that you only need $1. Companies like Fidelity offer fractional shares, and instead of buying entire shares of stock, you can just buy fractional shares, which are like buying slices of a company or a fund. So that means if you have $1, you could invest that dollar into the stock market. But just know, like if you're using Fidelity, that feature is only available on the mobile app. So if you're trying to get this transaction done via web, it's not available to you at this time. You've heard all the initial steps that I've taken in 2020 in order to set up myself to retire. Please do me a favor and like this video if you enjoyed the content that I shared today. So I hope that I've inspired you to start your journey. Thank you for watching, and good luck with all your financial goals. See you next time. Bye.